Welcome to Live Labs. We're thrilled to have you, Dana. And maybe you could just share with us your name and who you are and a little bit of your background.
I'm Dana Larson, and I am a freelance event and content strategist. I work primarily with agencies who work with large corporations on strategy for events. My background, however, was traditionally in the broader advertising space when I started in my career. So I started as a copywriter, actually. And I moved from being a copywriter into marketing and marketing strategy. And from there, I worked my way up to be a CMO and started my own agency with a couple of partners in 2000. From 2000 to 2007, we had an agency where I wore many hats, and I had a lot of experience doing everything from media planning and buying to still copywriting, leading a team of creatives. We even branded an entire transportation agency. So that's probably the longest lasting piece of business I've ever worked on. I still see those buses with the brand we did on those buses today. They're here in the Portland area. So that was about 13 years ago. And it's really fun to see that work driving around. I then made the switch to digital and worked in digital and started two very successful content practices at digital agencies in the San Francisco area, which was really fun and also really challenging to do. I guess my passion is really around content, and I think that content and content marketing per se is a lot about understanding people and having empathy for people. And you can apply that across a lot of different mediums and practices. And so I made the jump in 2016 to events. And yes, it was new for me to go into events. There was a whole language I didn't understand, but I learned very quickly and brought in that experience from digital, from my traditional advertising background, and was able to start to apply that immediately to events, and saw a lot of opportunity where there could be a lot of crossover between what was happening in digital in terms of creating long-lasting relationships with people, and bringing that into the event world where things seem to be a little bit more ephemeral. You know, you come to an event and you have that experience, and then you leave and rinse and repeat next year. You do the same thing, and hoping to maybe transform the way people think in the events industry felt like a really exciting opportunity for me. So that was about 4 years ago, and I've been doing event strategy since then. Sorry for the long preamble there.
No, it was awesome.
That
It
was great.
really,
Yeah.
and there were some really great pieces in there as well, particularly, I think, this idea of maintaining a relationship and kind of battling the feeling of just redo and sort of start up again from scratch every year.
Yeah.
I think that's a big idea that's running through a lot of people's minds right now.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Great. So you actually had an interesting experience, I guess, at the beginning of this year. And how did that shape kind of your thoughts on even putting together a piece on going from live events to virtual?
Yeah, I did. You know, I have this event that I love working on. I've worked on it for a couple of years. And this year I started working on this particular event. It's for a large company here in the United States. They have a internal event every year where they bring in 6,500 employees from around the world. And this is 6,500 employees in one division of the company, in the sales and marketing division. And it's their one opportunity to bring everybody together. And everybody looks forward to this. It's there's a lot of eyeballs on this event. And so as the team who works on this event every year comes back. So for us, we're like a family who works on it, and we look forward to that. But more than that, there's a lot of pressure to do better each year. So, better than we did last year. And so there's always this exciting challenge around that work. And so we had started in September of last year working on the strategy for this event that would take place March 9th, 10th and 11th. And we had so many kudos from the client on how well we had planned through things like strategic theme. We had it earlier than they'd ever had before. We had all of our speakers who had incorporated that theme into their speeches, to their talks, to their presentations, which was an actual expressed goal. We had KPIs and metrics against this. So we were really excited about how things were going. And then January, February came along and coronavirus popped up in Asia Pacific. And this was definitely an impact for us because we had attendees who were in that region, and we started to become a little bit concerned about, how would we serve this particular part of our audience if they couldn't travel. So we immediately started thinking about that. But it wasn't top of mind that the event might be canceled. And then we were about 3.5 weeks out from the event. And I will say that this particular event has 3 agencies that work on it, which is a little bit unusual, but our agency that worked on it is involved with all of the content. So the format for the event is 2 days of general session. So about 35 speakers. It's a lot of work. My role is driving all of the content for those speakers. So working with all the speakers, determining what they're going to say and put on stage, along with the client who does the overall programming, but working with those speaker teams in getting that content ready. And then we have my counterpart who is the creative director, who does all of the graphics for the presentations, the whole look and feel for the show, because there is an expo area and there's an agency who works on that. There is an agency who does all of the staging for the actual where the presentations will be given. So all 3 agencies got a notice saying there's going to be a call in 30 minutes. And we all figured it out. It didn't take a genius to figure out that the event was going to be canceled. And sure enough, it was canceled. However, the company said, we still need to get this information out there. This is our one opportunity to share really important information about our year ahead. And we're going to share it virtually. We don't know how we're going to do that, but we're all together going to figure that out. But the catch is we only had 3.5 weeks, and we had a lot of content to figure out how to get out in 3.5 weeks. And a lot of content that had been, planned very, very carefully for the last 7 or 8 months. And so for us in our minds, like, how do we pivot something that has taken us this many months to get to in 3 weeks? It felt in that moment I would say 50% impossible and 50% exciting as heck to have the opportunity to try to do that.
How much of that content was intended to be delivered live?
All of it.
All of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So basically every piece of information that needed to be put into a digital format, like the entire content of the entire conference, effectively needed to be moved.
Correct. Yeah.
Your reaction is interesting because the gentleman, Garrett, that we interviewed from the Lego conference, they had, I think, like 5 days to pivot. And they were same thing, like 50%, okay, scared. And then the other 50%, like, this is awesome. And he said teams actually split that way too. 50% of the people didn't know what to do and 50% just embraced it and ran with it. So it's it's interesting. And he also had said, he almost thinks it's an interesting exercise that because they had worked on it, I don't know as long, but probably a similar time. But how he actually liked the challenge of having less time to figure out what to do. Like it made them make decisions quickly, and he felt that was like the best thing ever.
Agreed. Yeah. Sometimes, that forced decisiveness is a good thing because you can overthink things sometimes to the point of beginning to water down the ideas. And, if you've ever worked in an organization where they have many, many layers of the onion in terms of approval processes, something that starts out beautiful, once you've had 8 different, layers of people who are providing their input, who might not all have the same level of understanding of where you started, what you get at the other end isn't always the best work, right? So I think, decisions are the same way.
Did you guys sort of have to turn into kind of a war mentality a little bit? Like, was there a sense that the people who were actually pushing the rock up the hill was a core group that needed to kind of just jump in, or did you remain a very large group of people working on the project? How did that kind of translate?
We kind of flexed. So initially, when decisions were being made on the client side, it was a little quiet for us on the agency side, which felt uncomfortable. I'll be really honest, not knowing what's happening on the client side. And we recently just had our postmortem with the client, and we put that forward to them. We said, it felt like to us a lot of time was wasted in that first week as you were making decisions and not sharing it back with us. And it could have been, and most likely was, that you were making really critical decisions that you needed to do, and you had to share up your ladder that took time we couldn't see. But that is hard when you don't communicate back. And that was a good learning for them to understand that, their partner needed to hear back. Now, what we did on our side is we had a big team as well, but there was a core of 4 of us, the leadership team, who were involved in client meetings, and we would filter what we sent back to everybody else because it changed hour by hour. They would change their, we would change our mind, we would be changing on the fly, and we didn't want to create swirl in the work. And so we would just do a daily readout of what was happening. And we told everybody up front, you will find out daily, once in the morning and once in the afternoon, what's happening. We will keep you informed in that way, but we're not going to tell you after every little meeting, partially because it can create swirl. And that worked really well. They knew what to expect in terms of communication. And it didn't bog them down with details they didn't need to know.
How smoothly did the technology choice happen in terms of, we're talking about a big company here that has access to technology. And so was that sort of understood? Was it really just about how you were going to package the content, record the content, and get it to, or were you also making decisions about how was this going to get broadcast, and how is this going to be set up, and what would the kind of user interface be, and all of those questions?
Such a good question. And I think we had some idea that we were very lucky in that instance. And now that I'm working on some other projects, I realize how incredibly lucky we were. This particular company already is built for that. They have a platform for delivering.
It's part of what they do, right?
Part of what they do. They have a live platform. And so we didn't have to think about that. It was already, they had a couple of options. We just had to pick from 2 options. And, that decision came down to internally, which was the best option for our audience, and that was a really simple decision. And so it was very easy, and I know that can be the hardest decision sometimes to make, because 1, you might not be familiar with the delivery options and have never worked with them, and so you have to then bring on another team. This was already in-house. We didn't even have to think about it, and there was resources there, so we're very lucky.
And on the format, not the technology, but actually how you were framing and delivering the content, one of the big questions people have now is you take the live kind of format and you say, we have keynotes, we have breakouts, we have all of these things. how do I do a keynote? How do I do a breakout? How do I get these things done? And the big question, I think, is also, should a keynote be 20 minutes long?
Mm-hmm.
Or if we're moving that into this format, do we need to rethink everything and say, hey, welcome to the 4-minute keynote, welcome to the 12-minute breakout? Like, how do you think about format and whether you basically take the live thing and find the best way to transfer it, or whether you have to rethink it fundamentally in order to be engaging within the new constraints?
Such a good question, and one that I think is so important, whether you're doing a pivot or whether you're starting from scratch in virtual, is to plan, program, develop for the medium. And it is different than live. So you are going to have a different attention span than you would if you were in a room. And I will say, for the most part, most live events, face-to-face events that I go to are too long. And those sessions are too long. And by the last 30 minutes of it, most people I see are like, heads down in their phones anyway. And so, I think there needs to be a lot more thoughtfulness and consideration of our audience and what their day is like in general in our programming of our events. But back to your specific question, yes. So we originally have already, I mentioned that these were 35 speakers, and the average length of a session was between 17 and 20 minutes in the live event. So already fairly short. With breaks and a lot of what we called surprise and delight moments built in between, small little palate cleansers, just because that's how we know that you keep people engaged. But even moving to this format, we knew that we had to do something more than that. We were not going to keep people engaged at 20 minutes back to back to back. That was going to be difficult. So the first thing we did was we greatly cut the overall program by about 50%, maybe a little bit more. Because even though this was an internal event and it was somewhat compulsory, people were, they would have to view the content at some point or another. And there were watch parties set up. There was a whole big effort put in by our group along with the client to come up with a plan to get people excited and engaged in actually consuming the content through social media campaigns ahead of time, setting up watch parties, sending out kits for people to get excited, all of that kind of thing. We still knew, even with all of that, we needed to change our approach. And so we came up with different formats. We came up with things like even podcasts ideas, coming up with, a couple of 7 or 8 minute and a couple of 1 or 2 minute pieces in between. So yes, we definitely changed the format and the style. We had, some really fun little pieces that we did that were more like actual commercials that were a spoof on different topics. Unfortunately, I can't give too much away, but they were really, really fun. And in fact, some of the comments that people posted were, it was like watching the Oscars, the VMAs. One person posted that her spouse had come in and said, "Wait, I thought you had to work on some internal event today. Why are you watching TV?" And so, it was definitely a much more entertainment focused event. And that's how we planned it. We looked at it more like if we were TV producers putting together a block of programming to keep people interested, what would we do?
Right. And that must have already been a whole new approach to thinking about conference programming that sort of was much more compact and flowed and sort of had a much more kind of curated feel to it and kind of
much more curated.
One of the things that we've been talking a lot about at Live Labs has been the question of synchronous versus asynchronous communication. Like, how important is it that what's happening is really happening now versus something that you're watching that was taped before and is just getting shown right now? That's one part of the question. And then the second part is, how important is the feedback? Like, what are the channels to go back upstream? Television generally doesn't, it's a one-way street, right? TV comes at you. And I guess one of the big questions and changes in TV viewership has been that now the viewers want to be able to be engaged in a conversation as they're watching with some sort of a friend, community, response to sort of a fan base. How did you, in this first scramble, but how going forward do you imagine we can enhance the communication, not just out from the brand, but back to the brand during the conference?
So that's a great question. You know, in this particular situation, it's an internal event, so it's a little bit different. And there was, you know, as we said, a great effort put into a lot of social media, and there was social media, private social media channels available to this group, and there were moderated channels that were driving conversations during the content itself, but there was not a lot of live content. There was a couple of places where there were Q&As, but beyond that, most of the content was recorded. And there were very specific reasons for doing it that way, partially because they didn't want to put live content out and exclude a particular region or geography, because it's hard. You know, if we put it out in Chicago time, where does that leave people in Asia Pacific?
Right, if it's 4 a.m. or whatever, yeah.
So
that makes a lot of sense.
It was a lot of thinking about that, like, how is that fair? So trying to think through that, and that is a problem that people will have when, you know, you think about doing a global event virtually, is how do you include people from around the world and have that be fair. But driving that conversation between brands, I think, is really going to be the effort of, say, a host. Like, a host could do that, where that is the one live element, right? So all of the key content is recorded ahead of time, and there are lots of reasons why you would want to record your key content ahead of time and have that ready to go and simulate that live. And, you know, most of live TV that you see is not really live, it just looks live.
Right.
And you can do that with events as well. And a host can be somebody who can come in and engage an audience. And I saw a great LinkedIn, which was actually live, with Bob Bijan and somebody else on his staff who is head of events from Microsoft. And what made that really interesting to me was the constant questions that people were posting about what they were speaking about. So they would be speaking about a topic. They had a host who she would ask questions, and it was basically a Q&A, and Bob would answer, and then other people would comment on the side. And it was that thought-provoking connection between what people were saying, and you could see, and you could like heart it or a thumbs up, and you could, you know, give your own kind of feeling and feel like you're engaging as well. Or you could be a lurker and just kind of watch if you're not that person to be so out there and connected, but you still feel connected with it. So, but that could be done in even you know, a recorded situation where you have that chat capability. So much technology is out there to do that, where you're putting it across and it's recorded, but people can engage with each other, and a moderator could be asking questions through the software to get people chatting with each other, and they're driving, you know, that conversation through they could be doing it through their own brand lens to maybe get them thinking about it, but people are helping drive the conversation.
It's interesting. I was thinking as you were talking about the mayoral New York City, where I am, the mayoral daily report on the virus, and just that those get recorded every time there's a session. And if you look at that session afterwards, you still see all the comments and all of the different hearts and things that took place earlier in the day.
Mhm.
And you're right, you do really get a sense of how was not just what was the presentation, but how did people receive the presentation, which I
Exactly.
think is an interesting thing to have a record of that we never used to monitor in that way.
You get the sentiment of the audience, of the attendees,
Right,
that you
right.
don't get, like you actually don't get even when you're sitting next to somebody in a room, because people don't tend to say, they don't even give you the thumbs up or the, oh, I heart you, or any of that, even if they're thinking it like in their mind going, oh, that was kind of clever. You don't, that isn't telescoped to you as you're sitting next to them. So in
Totally.
some ways, you know, you may actually get more information virtually from your fellow attendees.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So this experience and this scramble led to obviously some thinking that you've been doing
Mm-hmm.
about what does it all mean. And a couple of weeks ago, I think you published a think piece on this.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could, I know that piece sort of, one of the things we all need so desperately is to just limit the list to just a few items to focus on, because the list every day gets to be like 37 items long until we just get a headache and give up and then pour ourselves a drink. So I think, one of the things that I thought was great about what you did is you broke things down into kind of 5 areas. And I wondered if you'd be willing to talk about what made you want to write this all down and then what those basic focus areas were.
Sure. Yeah, I want to start with the reason I wrote it all down was at the time, our event was one of the first events to be canceled because of COVID-19. It was in the news, and so I knew that I was probably one of the first people who had gone through this and could share my experience. And that there was that 50% that of feeling nervous, feeling afraid, like how are we going to do this, and of the unknown of, wow, what are the steps, and a little bit of flying the plane while putting the wings on or whatever the metaphor is. And I just felt like if there's anything that I learned that I could share with somebody else that might help them, that's what I wanted to do. And so now as I look back on it, I still think a lot of it is valid for a situation where you're having to do a pivot. There are some things that I would do slightly differently if I knew that I was just starting from scratch and going to work on a virtual event. I might call those out. But I wish that I'd had this list. That's why I developed it. It would have helped me a lot if somebody had given me this on that day that we got that call. So, the first one is really about being decisive and making those big decisions as quickly as possible, because that lag time where you haven't made those decisions costs you. In the end, we ended up developing what was the equivalent of 17 TV shows. We shot in 6 countries in 10 locations in 9 days and produced what was 17 TV shows to pull this off, which is kind of amazing if you think about it. You'd asked earlier, was it a small team or a big team? Initially it was a smaller team, and to get that done, that took a big team. We had to call in other people. And just as a reminder, this was before everybody got shut down and everybody was shelter in place. This happened midway through, like people started shelter in place towards the end of our production. So by the time I flew home, I was one of like 5 people on a plane. So it was a surreal experience for sure. But making those big decisions is really what is going to be the basis of everything else that you do. And most likely, if you're in a pivot situation, you're not going to have a lot of time. So you need to have those decisions made, determining really, what is most important to deliver. It is going to be a disservice if you just take your agenda from a live face-to-face event and put it virtually. That is not going to serve anyone well. So you really do need to think through, what do I really, really need to deliver? What is the most important part of my agenda that people need to see? And how can I make it better for this medium, for this delivery platform that I have? How can I capture the content? Is everybody available? That's a first, especially in this much more restrictive COVID-19 world that we're in now. There might be some people who aren't available to film that you originally planned to work with. So making those kinds of decisions right up front, understanding that. And, if you're, some people may throw their KPI tracking out the window when they have to make it a pivot, or you may just say, I'm just going to focus on these 2 things when I had 8 before, but knowing that up front, so you have a strong foundation.
So from your perspective, it really turned into, suddenly you guys were producing a movie.
Yeah.
I mean, you were sending camera crews around, you were figuring out how to get scripts cut and rewritten, you were trying to figure out format, you were encouraging presenters to get their story straight because it's going to have to be shot earlier than their original live presentation. So it was a massive production effort.
Yeah, so I mean, in a situation where, we had, table reads on the schedule, they were actually shooting on those days where they had planned to do table reads. So,
Wow.
Our speakers lost a week. They had, had to change their formats in some cases where, their format was, they were going to be on a stage at one point, and then all of a sudden, now they're doing a Q&A, or they're doing something different because we've changed the approach to better fit the medium. And, everybody from the crews to the speakers rallied. I will say that that's part of the reason we were able to do it. Everybody was willing to just give it their all and do whatever it took to get it done, which was amazing. So
it's awesome.
After you make those big decisions and you decide what's in, you decide what's out, what content is going to actually play well in a digital format, who's available to you, you've got to build a team. And the team is slightly different than your live team. It's going to take some additional people that you may or may not have. So, a lot of the people that you have still are needed, but then you'll need potentially some additional people. So if you're doing a lot of post-production on videos, so presumably you'll do a lot of work that is not live, or even if it is live, you'll still need things with like lower thirds and tops and tails and intros and outros and overlays, all of that production work that makes the presentation look higher quality, it makes it look professional, is different than the PowerPoint or keynote work that you might be used to doing during a face-to-face on stage. And so you might need animators, you are going to need sound design people, you're going to need editors, video editors that you didn't have before. You might need camera crews if, once we get past the shelter in place and we can go back to using a small studio with 10 or 15 people, you're going to need film crews. I think I could see a world where we have that in the summer potentially. We could do some small crew shooting and open that up a little bit. We would need those kinds of skills as well. But just kind of looking beyond kind of a traditional face-to-face team, thinking about it slightly differently. beyond that, the next one is really thinking about, your audience needs and kind of the pros and cons between that virtual live and on demand. And when I'm talking about is kind of like that, are you really truly live in this moment? And is it more like a simu-live or on demand, and thinking about the pros and cons. And so really the pros of being live are that engagement. So do you want to be able to do polls or Q&A? Do you want to have some kind of exclusivity or urgency that only live can bring? So, if you don't see it right now, then
you missed it.
You miss
right.
it.
You
Exactly.
missed it. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So
Fascinating.
So if the cons of that are, things can go wrong, especially now where we are filming in our homes, as we all are. There can be a delivery at the door and the dog starts barking, and we're much more tolerant of those things than we were 2 months ago, before we are all in this situation. But still, it's not something that anybody would want to have happen when their CEO is giving a keynote address for an event, for that to happen. Or heaven forbid, if the power should go out. I mean, that has happened to me twice in the last month, where our power has gone out or the internet has gone out. And then what do you do? So, we're not in a place, most of us, where we have, a backup generator or something that would ensure that we're going to have uninterrupted internet connection.
Right.
So those are some things to think about.
Dana, did you do anything, you mentioned like polls or, thinking about the audience. Were there any things that you did that actually worked well, or maybe you wish worked better? If at all.
So we did Q&As, and Q&As work really well, because the great thing about Q&As is that somebody has a question, that way that gets answered creates another question for somebody else. So it just snowballs, right? It's where what your question spurs a question for somebody else, and that's the power of community. And so that is probably one of the best reasons for live, I think, is that interaction. And there are some platforms that allow the person who's asking the question to also be shown, and some people like that and some people don't. Some people don't want to be on camera, they just want their question to be heard. So there's a balance there of thinking that through. I think that for the most part, people just want their question heard and their question answered. I'm trying to think of other things. There's other ways to interact that work well, but they don't necessarily need to be live.
Right. And I think because this was an internal event, it also, people already internally had their ways to communicate with each other as well. So a little different.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. And I'd be happy to talk about that. So there was a lot of other things we did to create engagement. So things like we had a trivia, like a quiz at the end of each section of content. So the content was put out in what were called episodes, which were little shows put together. And the shows were all named and titled like a TV show. And so they all had their own titles, and then they were released in an episode of 2 or 3 shows. And then at the end of that, there would be like a trivia quiz. And partially it was for learning, and part of it was just fun to see, who could get the most of them right. So that part was fun. And then also people could post to social media with a hashtag of themselves watching and participating with the content. And there were a lot of funny ones. People, some people were on their walking treadmill, some people had their their mother's nursing. There were, everything you could imagine. Somebody at the top of the Burj Khalifa, which was these amazing views. And then all of those submissions were put together in a big photo mosaic at the end to bring everybody together. So, lots of fun ways of bringing that engagement for the whole.
It's interesting. Dana, when you talk about the audience engagement, and these ideas all sound great, I was interested when you said the Q&A ends up being a really good old warhorse, only because of that element of surprise and improvisation and sort of accident, where you don't know what the next question is going to be that someone asks, and then you riff off of their question, and then you kind of get this spontaneous conversation to happen.
Yes.
And in a way, that spontaneity seems like a big part of what people actually go to live events to have, like the incidental conversation, the accidental drink that led to something, the sort of ways in which we bump up against things by accident versus the very deliberate content. I'm wondering, in addition to the Q&A, what are other settings? Like, did you have chat rooms, or were there spaces at all that allowed people to kind of mingle, as it were?
In this case, it's already set up where different groups can find each other through different social channels. So that wasn't something that we further created, but I have done that on other events since. So we didn't create additional chat room. We had a particular channel that was just for social interaction, but we didn't have chat rooms set up. But
That's cool.
what would happen is people would start a string of like comments on a particular subject, and then that string would kind of take a life of its own, if that makes sense. But they wouldn't actually go into their own chat.
Right. They would, though, have some place where they can be continuing that sideline communication.
Yes, because they already know how they can do that in their particular work setting.
Interesting.
Thank you.
So where were we? We were on audience engagement, or was that the third one?
That's right.
We were talking about audience needs and
Audience needs, right?
Yeah, and so really just talking about how you're going to deliver, thinking about any barriers that you need to work around. So you had talked about Itamar, what was the platform, and this is kind of where I talk about that is, if you are going to come up with or use a platform that you don't already have in-house, or in the case of a public audience that somebody else might not have, that they don't already own, is it easy for them to get that software? Is it easy for them to install? Is this a potential barrier? We did a Zoom birthday party for my son on Monday, and I spent the first 10 minutes of it trying to get my parents on Zoom. It was crazy. And so, thinking about like, what are the potential barriers, and who is your audience, and is this audience likely to have any issues with getting the software needed to join you in this virtual space? And for the most part, your audience probably is tech savvy, but it depends on who you are. Like, are you an association that is associated with AARP, and maybe your audience is older? That could potentially be a barrier. So just think that through. Have a plan that creates the least number of barriers that will drive higher engagement numbers. And then the one we talked about before is just about, timing. If you want to do live, think about your audience. Where are they joining from? What time is it for them? And plan accordingly. And then make sure that you have an on-demand version if it's not a convenient time for that, for all audiences, just so that they can watch when it is convenient for them.
Seems cool on the timing question also to think about, if I'm only going to engage, let's say, with 2 hours of content a day or an hour and a half of content a day in the conference, it's interesting to not necessarily put that all together in 1.5 hour experience, but to actually spread it out during a work day, and then to define the schedule around the conference a little bit for the participant. Like, here's some breakfast ideas, at about 8:15, do this and log on. And then at about 9 o'clock, we're going to take a half-hour break. Here are three ingredient muffins or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, to kind of help me think through my whole day of participating in some way.
Yeah, I'll send you guys a piece I just did for the Microsoft group. I know it's different than, it's a little bit off topic, but I just did a piece for them that is an entire attendee journey for a virtual event. And it steps you through, if you go through the slides, it's in a PowerPoint deck. And if you go through the slides, it's written from the attendee's POV. So you read the narrative, you see all the things in the slide itself, but it walks you through basically what you just said, Itamar, all of these different things. And it has all of these ideas in there where one of the ideas is a concierge calls you ahead of time. And it talks to you about what are your interests? What are you most interested in learning during this event? And they make some suggestions for what type of content you would, or which sessions you might want to attend during the event, helping you come up with a schedule. And then you get a box ahead of time. And in that box, there might be a promo code for DoorDash codes. And in that you get, your lunch would come using those codes. For things like your lunch breakout to go meet people. So if that's what you decided to do. So it has, that whole thing planned so you can have breaks built in, and it makes suggestions based on your particular needs. Like, I don't have any kids at home. I've got all day. I just want to power through and have all the sessions. Or I've got kids. I can only do 2 hours. What are the things I should see? And maybe I'll try to catch the other ones later. So that type of approach.
That seems like a super cool service. Like, I think that would be enormously helpful for a lot of people at whatever level that service happened, from a bot at the lowest level to like a real, like, hello, I'm calling from Paris and I would like to organize your food for the day,
Totally. And it could be either way. Absolutely. I mean, I know that C2 does it with actual people. And when I had my concierge call, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like a queen. This is amazing. You feel like such a VIP. And, it doesn't take a lot, but like you said, a bot could do it too. And you would still feel like, oh, this is amazing.
Little bit better. When I was in Berlin at the film festival teaching a few weeks ago, they assign you a person they call an angel.
No.
And it's literally like a young artist person from Berlin who volunteers in exchange for tickets to the film festival to just pick one of the people there, and they just show up like before you have to get anywhere in the morning, and they walk you there, and then in the afternoon they hold your tickets and they tell you, you have this and this year, we'll bring you there. And it's crazy. Like, it's very simple, but it makes you feel so taken care of.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So design a virtual show. So that is step number 4. And this is really about getting down to business and thinking like a TV producer, because ultimately that is what you're doing, is you're putting somebody in front of a screen. And once you put somebody in front of a screen, they are going to be expected to be entertained. If you look at the way people consume media on a screen, the things that they stop and spend time with are things that entertain them. It doesn't matter if they're on Instagram or they are watching a movie or or they are on Facebook or YouTube, the things that they stop and spend time with are things that are entertaining. And so if you want to keep their attention, it needs to be entertaining. And you've got to just design your content and your virtual event in that same way. It needs to be entertaining. Now, that's not to say that, you know, you have to have a show full of dancers and singers and comedians, but it does need to be put together in a thoughtful way. Storytelling, I know everybody's tired of storytelling as, you know, the most important thing you can do is tell a story, but it actually really is important. You know, there's been a lot of talk about only being able to understand and comprehend 18 to 20 minutes of content. Like, there's neuroscience that backs this idea. That's why TED Talks are 18 to 20 minutes, and they're not anything longer than that, because we cannot handle anything more than that. Like, once we see more than 20 minutes of content, our brains turn off. We just can't do it. However, in a crisis situation, that number reduces greatly to 12 minutes. That's what we can handle in a crisis situation, because we're already processing so many other things just in the back of our minds. Like, how long are we going to be in this state? How long, you know, am I going to lose my job? Am I going to get COVID? Like, there's so many other things that are in the back of our mind that are taking cycles, thought cycles, that to be able to handle information is difficult. And so they say that in this situation, we can handle about 12 minutes. And so to make it more exciting, more engaging, and easier for people to comprehend, we need to bring in stories. That makes it easier for our brains to understand and comprehend and hold on. And it's just more enjoyable too, to have a story. We can relate better to a story. So if somebody says, I have this great product, it will go 50% faster, and it will make you X% more efficient. Okay, great. But why do I need it? Do I need it to be faster? I don't know. Do I need to be more efficient? If you tell a story around why you set up a story, you know, today, you know, I can't do this because I am too slow and therefore I'm losing, you know, you tell some story around it, then people go, aha, now I know, now I understand why I need it to be faster. Now I understand the possibilities of why having more productivity would benefit me, because you've told the story that makes sense and why I would need those things. But if you just give me speeds and feeds, that doesn't help me any. Those are just numbers that are, you know, in one ear and out the other. It's not helpful to me. So really, like, bringing in those storytelling factors and parameters, and I can't find the right word because I've got a headache, will help you be so much more effective.
Mm. Mm.
That makes sense. So the TV approach, I mean, you really, that's something that's probably, we're all used to seeing things on TV that get us, but probably not used to producing them or even understanding what's involved in producing them, right? So there you sort of need a different skill set, a different framework, and something kind of really important for people to consider. So just jumping on, porting what you have to a virtual space.
Yes, definitely. So, like, getting back to, like, the nuts and bolts of it is, like, in addition to telling the story, it is connecting that in a way. So if we think about it today at a face-to-face event, you know, you've got the voice of God, and it says, you know, Sherry Huss is up next. She's going to talk to us about, you know, storytelling, and or she's she's a premiere maker and she's going to whatever she's going to do, and she takes the stage, and then she gives her presentation. So in a virtual space, it's very different than that. We are not used to that format, and because of the way that we need to put things in also an on-demand format, where each one of these little pieces might need to live alone and stand on their own so that they can be watched later, we need to give them graphic packages that we have never done before in face-to-face events. So things like tops and tails, or intros and outros, which are graphic package headers and footers, basically, for lack of a better word. They would be like a little animated intro that has a look and feel that you establish for that particular piece of content. And what's really important is that it has a look and feel that ladders up to your overall event look and feel, but also works with that piece of content. So I recently saw something from Adobe, and they had beautiful intro and outro for their keynote. And I was like, wow, that's gorgeous. This animated piece is what you would expect for Adobe. And then I watched 6 other pieces of content from that same event, and they were all the same. And so every piece of content had the same intro and outro. And after a while, it was like, after the 7th or 8th one, it was like, oh my goodness, I want to see something different. And what I wanted to see from them was, I wanted to see that same beautiful effort applied in a way where I was like, oh, now I know I'm in this section of content. Now I know I'm in this section of content, something that helps me understand what part of the event and the experience I'm in at any certain time. Because we're sending our attendees through a journey. And so by helping them visually, graphically understand at what point in the journey they are in, they will understand when they see it piece by piece. If they're not watching it at the live moment, if later when they're watching it on demand, it makes sense to them.
It's interesting because this almost becomes the new translation in a digital space of signage, wayfinding,
Yes,
branding panels, environment design.
absolutely.
Like that's all we have now. So that means that at the very beginning and at the end of a program, that's where the brand has an opportunity to express itself as the host of the event.
Absolutely.
And I think that's an interesting translation of a service that exists in the volumetric space in one way and skill set, and now suddenly becomes an editing video design problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and your number 5, tip number 5.
Prepare to execute. So, so it is more important than ever, because you're really looking for higher production value than ever, because what you are putting in front of somebody is they're going to be judging you very harshly. And I hate to say that, but there's this really high expectation once you put it on a screen that it's going to be very well produced. Now that said, there's also right now with everybody in their homes, an expectation that there's only so much people can do. So there's this fine line. Like when we did this particular event that I worked on, people were still allowed to travel at the first part of it. People were still allowed to go into studios. And so we were able to achieve quite a bit. Towards the end, that changed. We had speakers who were filming from their homes. And so you see a range of people on stages and then people in their homes. And so we had a bit of a challenge of how do we make it all look cohesive? And so that was a challenge for us to work through. And we were able to do that. We had some speakers who were in quarantined in Asia Pacific, and we had to build backstories around, why were they just sitting on a sofa when other people were on stages. And we did things like, oh, they were in an airport lounge, or, it worked into the story that way. But, just trying to get creative, because it is difficult, let's say that you have even 2 hours of content, if what you're seeing is somebody sitting in a chair at a desk for 2 hours. How do you make that more interesting? So whether it's a quality of production value or variety, there needs to be this consideration for the viewer and what their experience is going to be. So having empathy for, can somebody sit and just watch somebody talk for 2 hours? And it's not even if it's the same person, even if you switch to a different speaker in the same composition for 2 hours is difficult to watch. And so thinking through, how can you bring variety to that? What are the things you can do to make that more interesting? And it could be that you have, video or product that you can bring in and have a cutaway to, or you can walk outside and bring a different varied point of view so that you are bringing something different to your viewer and really opening up a varied experience for them while keeping it authentic.
It's awesome.
Trying to think of some other things during execution that are important to think about is, I have recently been looking at some work from some of the speakers, and these are speakers that I've worked with before that are really dynamic speakers on stage. And when they have an audience to play to, they are great. And then when you go to record them and they're talking to a camera, kind of like I am now, and there's not another person on the other side, it really changes the dynamic for them. They're reading from a script, and you can tell they're reading from a script. And typically they tend to read too fast and they're rushing through it, and it doesn't feel natural. And to the person on the other side, you can really see that difference. You can really see that it's them rushing through a script, and that it doesn't feel like they're having fun with the content anymore. So my advice would be that you always work with a director, and that director can be on a Zoom or a WebEx or whatever. Stop, slow down, take direction from somebody else who can help you feel more natural, who can be your audience of one, even if there's not anyone else, that you can play to them, that you can be a little bit more natural, because I think that it is hard to have a dynamic speech when you're looking at a computer or a webcam. That is really hard to do. And practice that. What helps you feel more comfortable talking to a webcam? Maybe put a picture of an audience, above that webcam, and pretend like that's who you're speaking to. That's who your motivation is when you're having that talk, because otherwise it can come across wooden, and you don't want that to happen either.
And that goes back to our conversation about the laugh track and sort of just the feeling of like, how do you not feel alone, or that you're talking to just an empty theater? Even with sports, like, it seems, I mean, there have been a million different theories about how to get sports happening again, but it's interesting to imagine a sporting event with no audience live, and whether that is just a weird thing to watch or whether it kind of works. And it's funny, you realize a big part of of a sports game is the performance aspect of it, that it's being presented to an audience.
Yeah.
And if you just had those two teams play like in the dark or in, behind closed doors, does it really get interesting and exciting in the same way?
It's like, even now with you, the three of us talking, I feel most comfortable in the moments where you ask me a question and I first start to answer that question. That's the easiest for me, that back and forth. And I think for almost any speaker, they would feel the same. That feels the most natural is that back and forth kind of natural
Connection. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And to be able to show that to people is, essentially probably more interesting too than this more wooden, I'm just talking to a camera thing. Although I have seen, some situations like Colin Malloy of the Decemberists does a noon concert every day, and he plays, and I think because he's a performer and he's used to speaking to people that he can't see. When you're a performer who plays in the dark, he plays in such a way that whenever he does these noon concerts and he's doing that, I feel like he's only talking to me. And I know that he's not talking to anyone but his webcam, but I feel like Colin's playing a concert for me and it's amazing. And if we can get people to feel like that, like if you can get people on camera to make people feel like they're being spoken to, just them, that would be an amazing thing to replicate. But I don't know how you do that.
Right. I mean, remember, this medium is also being used, the Zooms and the sort of from home medium is used by families, parents and kids,
Mm-hmm.
parents and grandparents. Like, it's actually a medium that we get pretty intimate on,
Mm-hmm.
like when we're not at work.
It's
We
true.
kind of
Yeah.
can actually be pretty stripped down on that and kind of have feelings and miss people and love people and all that stuff. And in a funny way, by doing this thing, you're kind of watching people split that difference. Like, part of what he's doing every day is kind of playing you a private Zoom conference like you were his friend.
Right.
And part of it is a performance that he's doing for his audience, but it makes the audience feel more intimate.
Right. Yeah.
Which I think is a good lesson to remember for all of this stuff, is that if you feel like you're really getting the real, then that's going to account for a lot, because in a big theatrical setting of a conference, you don't necessarily feel like you're getting the real person.
No, you don't. You feel like you're getting a performance and you feel like you're getting, I think the biggest thing is you feel like you're getting a message that's been curated for what the person giving it wants you to hear. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It was interesting too, just on a note I was reading today, someone was talking about some study that was done in Germany on the number of positive people in some viral setting. And the response to it was, this article was written by a business to try to be persuasive about the fact that the thing is almost over. And it just brought up this feeling of like, everyone has facts.
Mm-hmm.
And you feel like some of the facts are the raw, hard facts that scientists are generating about what the reality is, both to the better and to the worse. And then you've also got this kind of fake facts,
Mm-hmm.
which are sort of the corporate processed facts. Like if you talk to the hotel industry 2 weeks ago, they would tell you something that was really not based in fact, but was sort of a way of presenting facts to make it look like their industry was on its way back.
Yeah.
And I think people are very sensitive to that right now. Like, I think people want to be told the truth.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting piece of all of this too, because I think there's a marketing speak that can be used to bend the truth in certain ways and is regularly done so acceptably. But when it comes to people's health or to what the facts are about something that seems so important, people really want to be told straight, I think, what's going on. I think they
It's
appreciate that.
It's so true, and this is way off topic, but it supports that. I don't know how I got on some conservative mailing list, and I have not unsubscribed because I think it's really interesting to see what they think. And a lot of it is just like mind-blowing to get. I get it and I go, oh my gosh, how could anybody read this and believe it? And yesterday I got one, and it was about, I saw Fauci's name in the headline. I'm like, oh my God, please tell me they're not going to vilify Fauci. Like, I just can't. And I opened the email and I read it, and it was this something to the effect of, Fauci's just trying to do his job. I can't believe the left is trying to, basically they were standing up for Fauci and saying that the left was trying to do something. I didn't even get past that, but I was like, oh, well, when it does come back down to just the facts, we can agree. It's the one thing that we, both sides can agree on, is the facts of science. And it was like, it was actually kind of encouraging that both sides could agree on that piece of it.
Right. That's the big hope that we all have, that maybe we could all actually start just telling the truth to each other about this. And that would start a new trend of truth telling, which seems to have been gone for the last 5 years entirely.
Seriously. Amazing.
Cool.
Anyway, well, this has been amazing. Thank you so much, Dana.
And Dana, anything to wrap? I mean, I actually, when I read your piece, I also thought you kind of gave a nod to, well, it's been hard. Some of this is actually helping the environment, and a bit on sustainability too, which I think is another important topic. But anything before we wrap?
Yeah, a couple things I'd love to say on that. And I would love to say that, like, I do think there are two silver linings to this. One is the silver lining of this has been great for the environment. So when I think about the amount of waste in the event industry, it makes me sad. And I know that there are many people who are working on solving that problem. And I feel strongly that we will make great strides soon. But I think that this particular moment in time is going to end up being a positive for the events industry. I really do feel like there will be, this is opening a door for more hybrid events in the future. And that is the other part of the silver lining, is that, and they're connected, is that I think that the thing that I was hopeful about 4 years ago might actually happen now. And that is that event managers who maybe didn't feel comfortable with digital as a way to put on an event, we'll see that it is possible to have a good experience through digital, and that we will maybe consider it as a possibility moving forward. We'll see hybrid as a real possibility. So, there could be a case where we'll be live, but we'll also have part of that event that is virtual. And so that people don't need to fly around the world for something that they could consume virtually, and that people regionally might attend that event live. And we'll see that happening more, that hybrid event opportunity, which then could be less of an impact on our environment, and could also have long-lasting impacts in developing community in that way. So that's not such a throwaway each year, where we have created this opportunity for everybody to come together, and then when the event wraps, we say, okay, see you next year. But we're actually growing that community digitally as well throughout the year. So I see those as two really strong positives coming out of this.